I want to do a short comparison with the Genesis account because there is so much overlap and complementary information. It's a perfect case study for how these two texts seamlessly intertwine and support one another. This is exactly the kind of thing that you would look for if you found an ancient text and you wanted to see if it had any validity. You would look for another text that was like it, but different, from a different perspective, giving some information the same and some other information. This is exactly what a cross-reference is. This is the case study for cross-reference, Jubilees and Genesis. So here in Noah's Ark, now that we've talked about the chart, according to Jubilees, I've gone through now the Genesis account, which is chapter 7 and 8, that corresponds with this chapter 5 and 5 that we just did in Noah's Ark, but also 6. And so let's go through this chart now and talk about how Genesis complements this story, because Genesis also gives beautiful details, but different ones. For example, in the Genesis account, when Noah has to build the ark, this is detailed. How he builds the ark is detailed in Genesis 7. But let's talk about the timeline. Noah builds the ark at the beginning of year 1333. Noah, his family, and the animals enter the ark on the second month. Now, here's where it gets interesting. On the 17th of the second month, the ark is sealed closed. This is precisely mentioned in 7:16 of Genesis, that the ark is sealed closed by God. Both are mentioned in Genesis and Jubilees. The flood begins. This is mentioned in 7:10 through 11 of Genesis, that it happens on the 17th of the second month. So it's corresponding with the Jubilees account precisely. What happens in both books, it specifies what happens, which is the well springs of the great deep burst forth. Nikve'u ma'ainot tahom rabah. So these amazingly big kind of springs from the earth, from the depths of the earth, burst forth. 7 of them we know from Jubilees. And from the heavens, we have the floodgates of heaven are opened. Arubot hashamayim niftechu in the Hebrew of Genesis. And these are, again, in 7:10 through 11 of Genesis, and it has the same exact date that Jubilees is telling us to look for. So, and we know in Jubilees it's 7 well springs, 7 floodgates. So that's additional information that Jubilees gives to us. Then the waters are restrained, we see on the 1st of the 4th month. This is in 8:2. The mouths of the abysses then open and the draining begins on the first day of the 7th month. But what do we learn from the Genesis account? We learn something additional we can pencil into our charts if we have the book. And that is that on the 17th of the 7th month, according to Genesis 8:4, the ark is at rest. Now we learn back in Jubilees on the 27th of the 8th month, so another month and 10 days later, back in 7:24 of Genesis, the water is prevailing for 150 days. Just as in Jubilees, it says the same thing in Genesis. And then we learn that the water becomes visibly diminished at this time. After these 5 months, the water is visibly diminished. That's in 8:3 of Genesis. The tops of the mountains become visible on the 1st of the 10th month, also according to Genesis 8:5. The earth becomes visible also on the 1st of the 1st month of the next year, 1335. This is in 8:13 of Genesis. The land is drained. Noah removes the hatch. That's additional information from Genesis, that Noah is now removing the hatch then. The earth is opened. Now we have a whole account during this time of the bird that Noah sends out to see if it can find dry land, which is not included in Jubilees, but that happens now in the Genesis account. Then the ark is opened on the 27th of the 2nd month, also according to Genesis 8:14. And we learn that it is very dry then, completely dry. So in Jubilees, the earth is dry on the 17th of the 2nd month. And in Genesis, it's on the 27th of the 2nd month that it's very dry and the ark is opened. So that does not, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, if there's a year's worth of flooding, then a 10-day difference is a matter of perspective of how dry the earth is when the earth is totally dry. So a 10-day discrepancy there is totally fine for saying the earth is dry. And that's that. So there are so many correlations here, and yet so much other information that's brought up in the Genesis account. I encourage you to read inside the Genesis account chapters 7 and 8, and inside the Jubilee account chapters 5 and 6. This is a perfect case study to compare the two texts and see how they are coming from a different perspective, and yet they are saying the same stories. There is the same basic information. Important dates are repeated. Important information is repeated. The two things that are not mentioned in Jubilees that are detailed in the Genesis account are, one, how to build the ark, which is earlier in chapter 6. Here we see that Noah is told by God, make yourself an ark of cypress wood, divide the ark into compartments, put caulk on the inside and outside, put pitch. This is how you should construct it. 300 cubits length, 50 cubits width, 30 cubits height. Make a skylight for the ark. Great idea. Make it slanted so that it is 1 cubit wide on top. Place the ark's door on its side. Make a first, second, and third deck. And so this detail allows us to know what it looked like. And the other account that isn't included in the Jubilees account, but that is detailed here in Genesis, is later on the whole story of the bird. So the waters continue to diminish visibly until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st of the month, the mountain peaks become visible. This is now, we're in chapter 8, verse 5 of Genesis, which corresponds perfectly with Jubilee's account, that on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains become visible. But let's read here. After 40 days, Noah opens the window he had made. He sent out a raven. It departs. It goes back and forth until the water had dried up from the land's surface. So it's flying around and around until the water is dried up. Noah then sends out a dove to see if the water had subsided from the land's surface. The dove couldn't find any place to rest its feet, and it returns to him to the ark. So the raven went out, and it kept flying until water had dried up, but we don't know much else there. Then the dove is sent out, but it can't find anywhere. So a raven is more rugged, and a dove is more delicate. The dove can't find any place to rest its feet. It returns to him to the ark. There was still water over all the earth's surface. Noah stretches out his hand and brings the dove back into the ark. He waits another 7 days and once again sends the dove out from the ark. The dove returns to him toward evening, and there was a freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak. Noah then knew that the water subsided from the earth. He waited 7 more days, sends out the dove again. This time the dove does not return to him. So the first time the dove couldn't find anywhere to be, so he comes right back. It wants protection and safety and security of the ark again. The next time it comes back, it plucks an olive branch and it gives it to Noah, which is the universal symbol now of peace, one of the most prominent universal symbols of peace. And the third time, it doesn't come back anymore. It goes and lives its life, and then the water is drained, and Noah removes the ark's hatch. He sees the land surface beginning to dry, and by the second month, on the 27th day, the land is completely dry, according to Noah and according to Genesis. It is opened on that day, and so there is a lot of correlation. The ark is opened on that day according to Jubilees. The earth is dry according to Jubilees 10 days earlier already. Perhaps Noah didn't get the memo yet precisely, but again, a 10-day discrepancy when we're talking about years or a full year of flood is not very much. And so just wanted to show you this incredible comparison between Jubilees and Genesis. This is a great opportunity to do it here with this story because it's such a fascinating story that captures the imagination of people all over the world. There are these ancient flood stories all over the world, and like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in these ancient stories all over the world. So that's the comparison between Jubilees and Genesis for the flood. I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you for listening. This is Modern Jubilees, and we will see you next time.